Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the another session of IFS. So, for today's session, we are having our eminent faculty, Dr. Mrs. Umesh N. Jindal. She is a director of Jindal IVF, Chandigarh, former assistant professor PGI, Chandigarh, former fellow, University of Washington, Seattle and RSA, Kansas City, USA. Organizing Secretary on National Conferences, ISAR 2007, Fertivision 2008, Fertiprotect 2019, Organizing Chairperson for Fertivision 2020. So, Dr. Jindal, over to you now.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm not able to see you, but I hope you are able to see me. And today I'm going to talk about poor responders. But before I start, I would like to thank the Indian Fertility Society for starting this webinar series, Vibrate, and giving me this opportunity to share my experience, my views with you on this topic. And I will also take this opportunity to invite you to Fertivision 2020. I will go into little, which is now virtual and going to be held on 4th, 5th, and 6th December. Now, coming to the topic, poor responders, nearly 40 to 50% of women entering into IVF program have difficulties in response. Conventionally, we have classified these as low, normal, and hyper responders. But like all walks of life, there are different shades, and all shades of low, normal, and hyper responders are there. The prognosis not only depends on the response, but also on the age, embryo quality, and response also depends on ovarian sensitivity. There are many causes of this poor response or premature ovarian insufficiency, like chromosomal, genetic etiology, metabolic, enzymatic, toxic, autoimmune infections. I will not go into the details of these causes today. Just to understand the concept of ovarian reserve, this is a very good schematic diagram. When we do an ultrasound, we see three different types of populations of follicles. So this is one group or dominant follicles which have already started their journey toward the destination of ovulation, and this is the only the most it's reported uh, by ultrasonologist most of the times that so many follicles developing and ovulation plus or not. The second is these are the follicles from 2 to 9 millimeters of size, and these are visible on high resolution ultrasound as antral follicle count. And these are the follicles we will be able to recruit at the beginning of any cycle. Then the smaller follicles which are subantral, which are early antral or not, or uh, graphene follicles, these follicles are not visible on ultrasound, but these are the ones which actually constitute the ovarian reserve. However, the AFC also represents this reserve pool, and AFC is a good guide how much reserve is left in the ovary. Besides AFC, we have AMH, which is a very good method, and it has a direct relationship with these antral and preantral follicles. FSH is generally more linked to these events which are occurring in this ovulatory cycle, and so it is a more related to, and it is lost or it is raised only in very last stages. So these are the three ovarian reserve markers which we have and which have a fair uh, clinical importance. The other tests which are there are not very important, and we are not very commonly we use these methods for assessing the reserve. Poor responders is a very mixed group, and Bologna criteria. There was a consensus. Uh, ISHRE came to a consensus in Bologna, and they developed a criteria of 2011 in 2011. And out of these three, two of the three criteria have to be present to label a woman as poor responder: age more than 40, ovarian reserve tests were abnormal, that is AFC less than 5 to 7, or AMH less than 0.5 to 1.5 nanogram. It's also a very wide range. And previous poor response in previous cycle, which is less than 3 oocytes. But the problem with this classification was this was actually never adopted properly in literature or by researchers or in clinical practice. Because of these problems, the young women with decreased ovarian reserve were excluded, like a woman who in 32 with an AMH of 0.3. Older women with normal reserve were excluded, like a woman of 40 with ovarian reserve of AMH of 2.5. Then Indian women who achieve menopause little early, they were excluded. 38-year, I would take this as poor responders, so these were also excluded. Then one of the criteria was response in previous cycle, so it was not very useful for the primary cycle. And it was a very heterogeneous group, and no stratification was there. It was not related with prognosis, and suboptimal group which was clubbed in the normal responders was again a problem area which needed some attention. And according to this, almost 50% of women were excluded and not defined as poor responders. The Poseidon group in 2016, that is, Poseidon is an acronym for Patient Oriented Strategies encompassing individualized oocyte number. So this group took cognizance of the fact to the deficiencies of Bologna criteria, and they came out with a classification which takes into account the quality of oocytes, which is age related, and response to stimulation or quantity of oocytes, which is dependent on ovarian reserve, and as well as uh, response of the ovaries and exogenous factors like stimulation. So this is a grid depicting these criteria. On x-axis this is age. So on left they are young patients less than 35, and on right they are old patients more than 35. And on y-axis it is the reserve. The upper one is normal reserve women, and the lower one is abnormal low reserve women. So the normal reserve women are again divided into two groups. One is group 1A and 2A with poor response, that is less than 4 oocytes, and group 1B and 2B suboptimal response, that is from 4 to 9 oocytes were recovered in last cycle. Cumulative live birth rates in low prognosis women. This is an excellent uh, analysis of huge data which has been done according to the Poseidon groups. In this graph, you don't have to go into the details of this graph, but just see that the prognosis depends on various groups, and it is different for all the groups. And also the second point they brought out was that if you have less number of oocytes, the prognosis is less. If you have higher number of oocytes, the prognosis is better. So now the Poseidon basically it takes into consideration response as well as prognosis. So how it defines the objectives of the treatment, that the substratification of low responders are done from very poor. Low responders are distinguished from very poor. Then we have a better ability to prognosticate and counsel the patient. We have more homogeneous populations to analyze, to study, and we can have individualized stimulation regimes to maximum oocytes. And the tailoring of treatment can be done, protocol selection, detecting polymorphism, tailoring FSH dose, LH containing drugs, and special regimes like dual transfer and dual stim and other things. So counseling is a very, very important part of managing the poor responders. The self versus donor is the big issue, which most of the women would the first reaction is no to donor before even they start thinking about going for a donor egg. They want to do best for themselves. So we have to discuss best possible regime for them. But the most important is cost factor, which may be phenomenal and it may go quite high in these cases. The psychological impact of saying no, as well as of the treatment, the time involvement, which may be longer. They may have to undergo multiple cycles, and also despite their best effort, uncertainty of treatment. This is the most important part, which they have to understand what they are bargaining for. But if we decide to go for their own stimulation, then we must strike hard. We must get best out of what we can get from that ovary. What treatment options do we have? It can be divided into three categories: pre-stimulation adjuvants, strategies during stimulation, and some newer strategies which we can use. Out of these pre-stimulation, we have adjuvants mainly: DHEAs, testosterone, GH, and antioxidants. During stimulation, various protocols, dose, type, etc. we'll discuss, and newer strategies like dual stim, or the trigger and the ongoing stim. So first, coming to DHEA, which is most commonly used, or I would say sometimes abused drug. This is a pro-hormone from adrenals, mildly androgenic properties. Androgens increase FSH receptors and response. They decrease atresia, increase follicular growth and reserve, and increase growth factors and improve oocyte quality. This is the hypothesis. It is given as 75 milligram sustained release tablet and to be given 3 months before stimulation. Cochrane database, many have come out with improved live birth rate with DHEA supplement. The odds ratio was 1.81. But a very recent, a very excellent meta-analysis has been published by Dr. Kamath from Vellore, and he's analyzed all clinical adjuncts or adjuvants which we use for in IVF, and they have done a sensitivity analysis, which basically means removing those studies from the earlier database which had a high chance of bias. So if after this the significance is no longer there. But again, all this data is based on the old Bologna criteria or other criteria, so we still may have no clear answers to what we have. They may have a role in Poseidon 3 and 4. And this paper, which is mainly considering older patients, group 2 and 4, they used the multivariate analysis. The factors which were important for the outcome were, one of the important factors were DHEA use or pre-stimulation 3 months treatment with this, and AFC and AMH obviously. So DHEA may have a role in older women with diminished ovarian reserve. The second is testosterone. Testosterone is a very important hormone which improves sensitivity to FSH. It has an important role in follicular maturation and estrogen secretion by the follicles. Transdermal patches or gel are available. Gel is also, and spray is also now available. And dose is 10 to 12.5 milligram per day for 2 to 4 weeks before starting stimulation, and you don't give it during the stimulation. The improved live birth rates with odds ratio of 2.6 has been reported. But again, after the sensitivity analysis, the odds ratio and the came down, and the confidence intervals widened a lot. So we still need lot more information on this testosterone use. Growth hormone. Growth hormone is causes growth and differentiation of pre-antral follicles. It helps in acquiring FSH and GH receptors. Oocyte, and the very important point is oocyte nuclear maturation. It has a role to play in that part, and it stimulates hepatic IGF-1 like production, which also helps in follicular recruitment and growth. There are a lot of studies about growth hormones and many meta-analyses also, which have proven that it improves live birth rates. It may not improve the number of oocytes, but it improves live birth rates, maybe by improving the oocyte quality. However, two recent RCTs do not support the case, but most of the studies have they're small series, and it may be used in group 2 and 4, again in older women uh, where oocyte quality is the major issue. The most of the studies are have problems with there's no standardized dose, duration, etc. Dose range varies from 1 international unit to 16 international units, and duration from 10 to 30 days, and very variable. So we still have far from any conclusion, but you can try in group 2 and 4. The cost is also a major concern with growth hormone. It adds to almost 40 to 50,000 to all stimulations. Antioxidants we are using very frequently, and these are scavengers and neutralize ROS and preventing cellular and DNA damage. All lots and things are included in vitamins, minerals, and acetylcysteine, melatonin, lycopene, and so on, zinc, selenium, CoQ10. CoQ10 is one of these antioxidants which is being tried more, and maybe in future it might hold some promise in improving the oocyte quality. Most of the meta-analysis support the use of antioxidants, and you can give these to these women. The problem with most of the studies are that different combinations are used, different products are used, and there's a lot of heterogeneity in studies, and so no conclusive evidence can be drawn. Again, may have a role in older women. So today's talk mainly concentrates on ovarian stimulation. So the objective is to get at least one euploid blastocyst. To get one euploid blastocyst, we have to have a number of oocytes. The landmark paper by Shesh Kamal Sunkara, uh, that is, she buried almost all the controversies which are related to controlled ovarian hyperstimulation, natural cycle, and so on. And it was clearly demonstrated that the outcome is related to the number of oocytes available. And lower the number of, this is the group we are dealing, the lower number of oocytes, again the likelihood of a success is low. And you require 1 to 6 oocytes to at least give one. If you have 1 to 6 oocytes, the implantation rate is about 17, and you have more than 15 oocytes, it goes to about 27, and so is the number of good quality embryos available. So, coming to the protocols, the long agonist protocol is one protocol which may be useful in poor responders. When antagonist protocol came, we all shifted to antagonist in poor responders, especially because we thought that long agonist protocol gives us requires a lot of gonadotropins, and the response may come down. But there are certain advantages in poor responders, especially in young poor responders, Poseidon 3, where cancellation may be less because of an increased clinical pregnancy rate may be there because of we get a synchronized cohort. There is no premature LS surge, so no emergency to stop stimulation. You can go a little longer, and you have minimum risk of ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome in these cases. But at the same time, don't think that it can never happen, because many of these unexpected responders do throw surprises many times. Ultra short flare, use flare of endogenous gonadotrophins. They are quite popular, but personally I have not used it much. Antagonist protocol is the other more popular protocol as compared to agonist. Almost equal result, but the problem is about the asynchronized cohort and premature LH surge, which we need to handle. And pre-cycle programming may be required to get synchronization of the cohort. Minimal stimulation can be done, clomiphene, letrozole plus gonadotropin, but only if good number of oocytes is available. Many times uh, they, clomiphene and letrozole can recruit more follicles than gonadotrophins. Natural cycle was, advised in a hope that natural selection of oocyte will be there to select normal oocytes. But I think enough studies are there that naturally selected oocytes are as randomly selected as hyper stimulated ovaries and multiple oocytes which we have. So natural cycle is practically out for poor responders. So duo stem and ongoing stem. So these are the two new concepts which I would like to discuss with you. We are now all aware that the follicle recruitment occurs in waves. We initially believed that follicle recruitment occurs once a month, but now we believe that follicular waves comes at 10 to 14 days gap, and all these waves can be available for recruitment during stimulation. So we can have duo stimulation, means there is a follicular phase stimulation and there is a luteal phase stimulation. There is a gap of 4 days after OPU. So stimulation, trigger, OPU, 4 days gap, stimulation, trigger, OPU. The oocytes retrieved are of similar competence, but you have to go for all trees in this cycles. Then another concept is ongoing stem, and this is the concept which we are using in our center a lot, where we, if you have one or two dominant follicles and you can see a secondary cohort of about 4 5 behind, trying to catch up, so we would just disregard the lead follicle and go after the secondary cohort and continue the stimulation till that cohort is recruited properly. And this ongoing stimulation is giving quite good results in many cases, especially uh, young patients and those women with unexpected poor response in category 1, 2 and 3. Agonist cycles, this ongoing stimulation is very good. You are not scared of premature luteinization. And actually, in fact, we have experienced hyperstimulation in couple of patients with this kind of method. But this can be done in antagonist cycle also, no issues. This is one report by Virili, who is the pioneer in this duo stem technique, and he has proven that the oocytes aspirated in follicular stimulation as well as luteal stimulation are comparable in terms of maturity, uh, blastocyst formation, and euploidy and implantation. So you have a fair, and this is the SWOT analysis done by him only. Higher number of oocytes and embryos obtained per ovarian cycle, more patients obtaining competent blastocysts per ovarian cycle, and no difference in competence between oocytes obtained uh, after follicular or luteal phase stimulations. The weaknesses are higher number of stimulation cancelled in luteal phase, no RCT or cost effective analysis performed. We need more experience in this. Freeze all approach is mandatory and applied only to poor prognosis patients. Opportunities, it might reduce time and give more research avenues, and threats are the cost effectiveness, increased dose, and we don't have long term studies. So whether to use urinary FSH and what dose? Urinary FSH is less pure, Recombinant is more specific for follicular phase. Intramuscular versus subcutaneous was the issue, but after getting highly pure preparations, these can be given subcutaneously also. The batch to batch variability is definitely a problem, and the cost factor is also a problem with recombinants. But usually the cost is offset by the higher dose required for the urinary products. But studies remain conflicting. In poor responders, perhaps you would like to do your best, so maybe you will use recombinant. There are many studies which say that higher does no great advantage if reserve is poor, but at the same time, we want to maximize the harvest. So we can start with a 300 to 450 units, especially in those cases of unexpected poor response or low responders where dose increase might overcome the receptor uh, polymorphism and may give us a good response in these patients. Coriflotropin alpha, which acts like which gives a bolus in the beginning, may again may be used in these cases, which can give us a good cohort of follicles. Whether to use recombinant LH or not. See, what we have to understand is recombinant LH. Now, after recombinant LH is available, now we know that it is 99 or near 100% pure. However, the HMG and highly pure HMG, which was supposed to have 75 units of LH, but actually it is not 75 units of LH. It's 75 international units of LH-like activity, and which is contributed by HCG. So the purity may be in 5% to 70% in highly pure group. So if you really want to add LH, then go for uh, recombinant LH. If again you have to see the cost, and if you are not able to afford cost, then you can give HMG, highly pure HMG also. In antagonist protocol, you should be using LH from day 1, and in agonist protocol from day 6 in agonist protocol. This is one again meta-analysis where role of LH has been analyzed by Alvigi and in 2018 recently published, and they came to conclusion, the group came to a conclusion that in hypo responders, that is you can say group 1 and 2B and advanced age, group 2 and 4, they might have better oocyte number and quality and better implantation rate with the use of LH. The trigger is given for final maturation of oocytes. Agonist cycles only HCG can be given, which has an LH-like action, and antagonist cycles, gonadotrophin, GnRH agonist can be given, which stimulates endogenous LH surge, and dual trigger can also be given. Endogenous LH may improve maturation of oocytes as compared to HCG because it also leads to a small FSH and progesterone peak, which is very important for final oocyte maturation. So we can individualize the trigger strategy also in every patient, and because we need more than 75% mature oocytes. And previous outcome or in a previous cycle is a good guide. If you have less number of M2 oocytes, then you should go for dual trigger. Freeze all, we now all have experienced higher success rates with frozen embryos, so we tend to freeze everything. But in poor responders, when you have only 1 or 2 embryos or blastocysts, should we freeze or not? This becomes a big question. So in those cases where there is increased progesterone on the day of HCG, or in cases of dual stem where you are doing embryo pooling, or when the patient needs a PGT, in those cases, yes, definitely freezing is indicated, but there is no need for routine freeze all. And this again very excellent review by Acharya et al. In 2018, the huge data from SART that freezing is beneficial only in high responders. They are again good prognosis group, but not intermediate and low responders. So there's no additional advantage of freezing in these patients. If indicated, do it. If not indicated, don't do it. So summarizing the management group wise. So Poseidon group 1, this is less than 35, and 1A is more than less than 4 oocytes, and 1B is 4 to 9 oocytes in a previous cycle, and AFC is more than or equal to 5, or AMH is more than or equal to 1.2 nanograms. So good ovarian reserve by definition. So this is the young best prognosis group, but it's a minority, 5%. Unexpected poor response occurred for some reason, and if we are able to get good response, the outcome should be good. Quite commonly, these women have LH and FSH receptor polymorphism and reduced sensitivity to gonadotropins. And this is one area of research which is coming up, and testing may be useful in these patients for this receptor polymorphism. And even if testing is not available, you can circumvent the problem by increased dose and duration of FSH. Recombinant FSH and recombinant LH, because if LH receptor polymorphism is there, then recombinant LH will be needed. So this may be useful in this group. Ongoing stem and dual stem may be used in this group, but especially in 1A, where it may be more useful. In group 1B, you should be able to get over the poor response or the low response with the help of other modalities. Agonist protocol or pre-treatment to synchronize the cohort is a very good strategy. So synchronization of cohort, you will not be wasting oocytes, you will get more mature oocytes if you have a synchronized cohort. And GH is generally not indicated. Maybe it will be required for a select group, but today we do not have that the idea, which is that subgroup. In Poseidon 2, this paper was again written by Sunkara, Sheshkamal Sunkara, and in 2019. And these are older patients, more than 35 years. AFC again is more than 5, or AMH is more than 1.2. And 1A, 2A, and 2B. Low response, poor response, and low response. The options are generally same. Downregulation may be a good idea, or antagonist protocol is also very good. A higher starting dose should be used. LH addition is optional, but need more information on this. And trigger again has to be individualized, as I've outlined earlier. Dual stimulation may be an option here because we need a higher number of oocytes than group 1. So dual stimulation may get good result in this group because we still have, although older, but we have good reserve. So if you have higher number of oocytes, you can go up to 10, 15 oocytes, then chances of getting an euploid blastocyst are much higher. Other options, adjuvants like androgen supplements like DHEA may help. Growth hormone again may help by improving the quality of oocytes. And PGT, if you get enough oocytes, then PGT also may be a good option for these women, but needs further research and validation. Then group 3 and 4. This is the group which is the most risky, or where you give them option of donor oocytes. There is risk of no or less than 3 oocytes. There are no embryos, no pregnancy. The possibility of this outcome may be there, and negligible studies according to the Poseidon groups. To get at least, the target is to get at least one euploid blastocyst. Pre-treatment estimate of oocyte number and post-retrieval estimate of euploid blastocyst is important parameter to give them prognosis. At least 6 to 9 mature oocytes in group 3 and 10 to 15 mature oocytes in group 4 is the target, and this 10 to 15 is a tall order. Even increase of one oocyte from 2 to 3, it raises the clinical pregnancy rate by 20%. Natural and minimum stimulation has no role. So this is the summary of management strategies for group 3 and 4, which basically I've already outlined, and this is the group where you can use permutations and combinations of all treatment modalities we have in our armamentarium, like adjuvants, androgens, growth hormones, pre-stimulation, synchronization, and then high dose of gonadotrophins, recombinant LH, and trigger. And in case of then you assess your prognosis by follicle oocyte ratio, that how many follicles gave you M2 oocyte, and depending upon that you can define your strategies again for the next cycle. So this was all about stimulation. Then there is a talk about ovarian rejuvenation, but I will just briefly touch it. If you read about ovarian rejuvenation, the most important conclusion which comes is the lifestyle and environment, and this is what is preventive, not curative, obviously, but we must take care and contribute our might in disseminating the knowledge about the role of lifestyle and environment in prolonging the life of oocytes. Hormones have been given in an attempt to rejuvenate the ovaries, but one must remember that if there is no deficiencies, super added hormones do not do any good. So vitamin D, DHEA, testosterone, melatonin, if there is no deficiency, there is no role. Ovarian transplant can be used in only a very minority of cases, but we don't know. In future, we might have some developments. Mitochondrial transfer, I'll come to this. Stem cells, I'll also come to this. PRP, autologous PRP, transvaginal needle-guided insertion into the ovary of preparation, platelet-rich plasma preparation. But the results are mixed, and still we do not have any conclusive proof that it works. And lot of ifs and buts are there, how the preparation is prepared, how is it is injected, can be injected properly or not, or actually finally what is the result. Then ovarian cortical tissue implant and bioengineering and artificial ovaries, all these methods except this mitochondrial actually go for stem cells. So how stem cells work? Before that, I will touch upon the mitochondrial. Mitochondria are the energy factories of the oocytes. Low poor embryos, they result in low number and poor embryos. There have been attempts to rejuvenate these oocytes with the help of autologous or heterologous mitochondria or ooplasm from donor oocytes. The augment procedure, which is registered procedure, they take out ooplasm from other healthy germinal vesicle stage oocytes or autologous oocytes, and then inject in the oocyte, mature oocyte. But now we have studies available which do not prove that augment has much benefit in these patients. Stem cells, whatever technology we use for stem cells like ovarian tissue transplant or grafting or mesenchymal cells, you have to understand the basic principle that to stem cells to work, we have to have first we have to have adult germ cells in different stages. So stem cells have to be there. This is the first requirement. The second is the niche. The niche has to be conducive. Neighboring cells or this niche which constituted by nerve cells, tissue specific cells, and etc., and then which give them growth factors and other stimuli. Then we have soluble factors which reach stem cells through blood. So blood supply is a very important area. Avascular areas do not stem cells do not proliferate, so you have to have blood supplies which give them basic growth factors and nutrients. Then we need physical stimulation like nerve fibers or heat, which need to artificially in the lab, which can stimulate these stem cells. Or plus you have to have a extracellular matrix which gives supporting, like soil. You, for seed to grow, you need some soil, so this is provides the soil where stem cells can grow further. So this is the technology, and future we may have uh, better techniques which can use this, and we know that ovaries do have stem cells. Only thing is we have to provide this support. And Dr. Deepa Bhartiya from Mumbai, she has published a lot of studies on recovery of ovarian stem cells, and in future it may become practical to be able to use this. To summarize the key points, the poor responders constitute nearly 40 to 50% of all women undergoing IVF. Poseidon classification has stratified these cases into various prognostic groups. Objective is to get maximum number of oocytes. Interventions can be pre-stimulation, stimulation, and trigger. We should look towards individualized stimulation. Therapeutic strategies need to be tried in different groups, and more evidence needed to come to some conclusive answers. So, and above all, we have to know when to say no. So, thank you all for your patient listening. And again, once again, I invite you to Fertivision 2020. Just to highlight, on 29th November, we are going to have 10 workshops, and during the conference on 4th, 5th and 6th, I think most of the names which I was taking during my lecture, like Sunkara, Polizos, Albigi, Mohan Kamath, and many others, all the senior faculty available international, they have agreed to come to us, and they would be there interacting with you. You can listen to them, and registration we have kept minimum just to cover the expenses. So please be there, participate, and we are charting out a very exciting program, and you will not get bored. You will enjoy the conference. So coming back to my presentation, so should I go to the private chat?
Yes, ma'am. To the sheet, ma'am. You'll be able to see the questions coming in.
Okay. So hi, good afternoon. So there is one question regarding DHEA 75 milligram be given with letrozole stimulation. For yes, you can, because see, what we are targeting is increasing the reserve, and we have to give 3 months before starting the stimulation. So letrozole will exploit only the available AFC. So their mode of action is different. So there is no harm in combining, because DHEA during stimulation will not do much benefit. You have to use it 3 months in advance. So what is the maximum dose of letrozole which can be given for ovulation induction? See, the permitted dose is 2.5, but we can go up to 5, and even longer duration can be used, but this longer duration is generally used for PCO patients. In poor responders, I think a very high dose may not help. Are there increased risks of early menopausal transition and natural menopause after poor response at first treatment? Yes, obviously the poor response generally indicates a decreased reserve, and decreased reserve women have a chance of achieving menopause early. So you should counsel these women regarding those problems also, their health risks also. Can you explain about the ovarian reserve in poor responders and how it can help in managing it? This question is from Delhi. The ovarian reserve basically gives us an idea about the response of the patients. AMH has a relationship the outcome, the response, and the quality of oocytes. And AFC, if you see on ultrasound, you can make out that how many number of follicles which you can accept if you stimulate it. Shalu from Gurugram asks, what is the maximum dose of gonadotropin you can use in Poseidon group 1? I think 300 is a good dose, but above 450 in general, in any of the groups, it doesn't help. But many times it depends on whether you are using urinary or recombinant. 300 of recombinant is perhaps a very good dose, especially in Poseidon group 1. Kailash Purohit from Mumbai asks, can you explain about G and CEF bioactivity of the women who may be a poor responder? SPA trial Humaydan showed that the addition of LS did not gonadotropin. Actually, can you clarify your question, Kailash Purohit, please? I'm not able to get this gonadotropin. CEF is for what? I'm not able to get this question. Then Simarjit Arora from Punjab, SPA trial, Humaydan et al. Shows that the addition of LS uh, did not show benefit in Bologna poor responders. Yes, I think I have elaborated in my talk also that most of the studies were very confusing because there was a heterogeneous, most studies, the Bologna criteria, it was a very heterogeneous group. And most of the meta-analysis from those era are confusing and do not reach you any conclusion, and most of the evidence is poor quality. So we need better studies in more stratified groups. And the study which I quote by Albigi in 2018, this shows that LH may have a role in hyporesponders and older women. Meena Birut from Jalgaon, do you support dual trigger for all responders? Well, I cannot say that we can support we can give dual trigger in every patient, although it does come into your mind that we can give to, why not give to all? But we actually don't know whether it really helping or not. HCG has been a good trigger also. So you can combine, but mainly the role of GnRH trigger is for prevention of ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome or immature oocyte syndrome. Ashima Sood from Jalandhar asks, please explain more about mitochondrial transfer. I think more. I just touched that topic today, but mitochondrial transfer, you have many techniques for that. You can, you can do a spindle transfer, you can do plasma transfer, but without pictures, I think it will be difficult for me to explain at the moment. But this is not being pursued by many groups these days because it was not very effective. Mitochondrial transfer may be a good option for those women who have mitochondrial DNA inheritable problems, and there in those cases it is recommended as a therapeutic modality for that. Swati Chandigarh, is there any effect of letrozole on endometrial thickness? Yes, letrozole is a known is an anti-estrogen, so it decreases the estradiol levels in the blood, but at the same time is that it has a short duration of action. So the day you stop letrozole, endometrium recovers within 3-4 days, and then it, by the time of ovulation or by the time of implantation, it, becomes normal, or rather has, and many times it downregulates the estrogen receptors and improves implantation. But to use letrozole in IVF cycles, it is still not very clear. But in PCO cases, letrozole is a very good option. Purva Shah from Gujarat, can you use estradiol downregulation from day 25 in an agonist cycle in poor responder with low AMH? If you are using an agonist cycle, then you don't need estradiol downregulation. You start agonist from day 21 of the previous cycle and continue and start stimulation on day 1 or 2. So you don't need estradiol before that. Priya Varshne from Gurgaon, any role of dual trigger, double trigger? Yeah, I think I have already highlighted that and answered your question in one previous. So dual trigger, definitely you can give these patients. Swati from Chandigarh, can we go for sequential ovarian stimulation for IVF? If first stimulation cycle is with down regulation protocol, after OPU, next stimulation with antagonist protocol. This is a difficult question. At least we don't have anything in literature, but I think so we can use, because by that time you do a pickup, the effect of down regulation will still be there, because you have been down regulating. So another week to 10 days ovaries would be down regulated, but I think you can use, because the ovary is stimulable, so you can do that. The down regulation does not affect follicular waves. They will come at their own pace, so don't worry on that part. I think you can combine. Manjula from Chennai, which stimulation is best for poor responders? I think you have to subclassify these into various Poseidon groups, and depending upon that, you can use. We individualize. We are using both agonist as well as antagonist protocols. Mostly we use recombinant, and LH we are adding in older women. GH we offer to older women who can afford, and DHEA also we use in older women. Testosterone also we are using. So we have to have our all our things which we have in our hands, keep ready, and use judiciously in all the patients. There cannot be a standardized protocol, and this is the whole purpose of Poseidon classification, that you use individualized protocols for every patient. Then Tamilsi Devi from Chennai, she is asking, women having irregular cycles, how to go for ovulation induction? See, irregular cycles in a poor responder generally means impending menopause. So this may be a very bad case for stimulation, for taking it. I would like to have her AMH and AFC values. In general, they would be very low, extremely low. And this is the moment where you perhaps would give a serious option of ovum donation, and this may be a futile kind of exercise if we go for stimulation in these women, because irregularity of cycles in poor decreased ovarian reserve is a very bad sign. Manjula from Chennai, can you arrange for more embryology topics in ART? Definitely, yes. I will convey to the IFS office about your suggestion, and they would definitely consider this request. And I'm thankful for your interest, and we would do that. Rajkumar Madan, role of DHEA to improve AMH. Yes, I think we did talk about it. DHEA may not help in all cases, but it may improve AMH in older women. So I think in group 3 and 4, this may be helpful. If the reserve is low, the ovarian reserve markers are low, then it is useful, but not in every case. Rajkumar Madan again, if trigger fails, can we repeat the dose? Again, this is a difficult question, but basically trigger is for maturation. So we really don't know that why this question usually doesn't come in IVF cases. This question comes in cases of IUI when we are stimulating and LUF occurs. In those cases, Repeat dose generally does not help, and we finally, I think we'll have to abandon that cycle. I think these are the cases. These are the questions which I got. And if you have any more questions, you can personally write to me, you can call me, or I'm available. So you can, I hope you all liked the talk, and a feedback would be great. That would give me impetus to go on.
Yes, ma'am. I think we're done with the questions now. So I'll request you for a short takeaway message for the participants.
Okay. So the takeaway message for everybody is the one is to join us for Fertivision to learn more. And I'm very happy that people want to learn. So it's really encouraging for us to go on like that. The second is that individualize the protocol in poor responders. Don't give them false hopes, give them realistic hopes and realistic estimate of cost, and many times help them to make a decision for their own oocytes or donor oocytes. And if you decide for their own, if the patient decides for her own oocytes, then do the best, strike hard. Dual stim is a good option, go for it if possible. I've not tried, but I'm certainly going to try it. Thank you. Thank you for watching. And I thank DocMode for this excellent platform, and also once again IFS for giving me this opportunity, and Zydus for giving us the grant to stream this important educational activity.